The one-child policy was implemented in 1979 after the success of a national campaign of family planning characterized by the slogan "Later, Longer, and Fewer," initiated in response to the Chinese population reaching 800 million and nearing 1 billion. Former President Mao Zedong commented, "We are not afraid of a population of 800 million or 1 billion. After 100 years, the Chinese population will constitute 50% of the world population, a frightening fact for the Chinese economy, which physically could not keep up its production for the growing population." The statement is also reflective of Mao's belief that a large population equates to strong national power. The family planning campaign relied heavily upon involuntary enforcement measures. Birth planning enforcers were planted in every village to keep thorough records of women that are of reproductive age, including records of their menstrual cycle, previous births, and use of contraceptives to prevent unauthorized pregnancies early on, highlighting the growing state intrusion on privacy. China observed a decline in their fertility rate by more than half between 1971 to 1978, prompting Deng Xiaoping, the leader of the People's Republic of China, following Mao's death, to set the goal of quadrupling the nation's GDP per capita by the end of the century. Deng recognized that it was the government's responsibility to fix this disconnect and improve the nation's economy, prompting the creation of the one-child policy in 1979, which sought to further control China's aggressive population growth and restore the nation's economic growth more rapidly than the family planning campaign. However, Deng's actions later revealed how the pursuit of ambitious economic growth was prioritized, overriding individual rights and freedoms, some of which include the dismissal of reproductive rights, child rights, and gender equality. The government holds a responsibility to ensure that all citizens have access to basic necessities such as food, shelter, and economic security. As China's overpopulation exceeded the government's ability to provide adequate amounts of essential resources for all citizens, the government understood that if they didn't make changes to their current policies, citizens would blame them for the resources they lacked. This would undermine China's legitimacy and show a sign of weakness, as citizens know that they cannot rely upon their own government for help. Although the policy was intended to improve the standard of living for Chinese citizens and fulfill the government's responsibility to provide basic necessities, it created resentment within the people and ironically hurt their future economic growth in return. To ensure citizens obeyed the policy, strict punishments were enforced. If caught after giving birth to a second child, a family could be fined years or decades' worth of their income. If these fines were left unpaid, second-born children were punished and unable to receive documented status or hoku, meaning they would be restricted from their access to education, healthcare, employment, and marriage, rights the People's Republic of China claimed to protect in their written constitution. If caught while pregnant with a second child, forced abortion was carried out by authorities. Besides hefty fines and forced abortions, families risked losing their jobs, having their property confiscated, or in more extreme cases, forced IUD insertion and forced sterilization. With the implementation of this policy, fertility rates further declined and many families were left broken. It is noted that strong implementation was used to not only enforce the policy, but to also instill fear amongst families and deter them from having additional children. From the implementation of this policy, 3 fundamental reproductive rights were violated: the right to life, the right to decide the number of children, and the right to be free from torture or other cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment. Families were robbed of an intimate choice all families should be able to make themselves, deciding how they wanted to grow their family. The government now held this power, limiting families to only one child and enforcing consequences for those who resisted. The right to life and the right to be free from torture and inhumane treatment were abolished, as family planning officials carried out forced abortions to mothers who were pregnant with a second child. Forced abortions could occur at any time of the pregnancy. On some occasions, abortions are forced upon the mother during their 3rd trimester. The 3rd trimester follows the period in which the fetus is typically considered viable and therefore considered patient as defined by the National Institutes of Health. An abortion of a viable fetus is, with few exceptions, never ethically justified. The abortion of a pre-viable or non-viable 3rd trimester fetus is only justifiable if the pregnant woman consents to it. Not only was consent not given before forced abortions, but forced sterilization is a human rights violation and can constitute as an act of genocide, gender-based violence, discrimination, and torture. The utter disregard for reproductive rights demonstrated the dangerous power the Chinese government possessed in their ability to control population growth at the expense of the citizens. This should not only alarm Chinese citizens, but also those who value fundamental reproductive rights.
The implementation of this policy also led to gender inequality. In order to carry on the family line and provide a stable life for the family, most couples preferred males over females. If that plan went awry, couples opted for a sex-selective abortion, putting daughters up for adoption or partaking in infanticide. This led to an increase in Chinese children available for international adoption. The overwhelming favor of sons resulted in an unbalanced sex ratio, with a shortage of women and a surplus of 30 million men, ultimately hurting China's future demographics, as seen in their increasing elderly population and decreasing youth population due to the millions of unmarried men, depressing future economic growth without new workers to enter the workforce. Many citizens took it upon themselves to aid the government in enforcing the policy by reporting women who were suspected of hiding a second child and spreading policy information, a prime example of the Chinese government regulating civil society and only allowing those who support their regime to exist. Citizens who followed their duty of obeying family planning policies received cash rewards, while those who were caught housing a second child or speaking out against the government were punished. A concerning matter that illustrates China's power to restrict constitutional freedoms and thereby citizen responsibilities, to stifle dissent in order to uphold authority and guard against perceived threats to state sovereignty. Zhu Pingzhong, a Chinese citizen who experienced the close monitoring of the birth planning enforcers, said this. Zhu tells us about one particular experience of hers in the early 1980s. She took 3 days off of work because she fell ill, and then came back to see the birth planning enforcers in her company building, asking her coworkers whether or not she had taken time off to give birth to a second child. The birth planning enforcers encouraged her coworkers to report back to them if they found out any information, and came back multiple times within those 3 days. This is a key demonstration of how the government practiced the invasion of privacy, monitoring citizens inside and outside of work without their consent. Despite Article 35 of China's Constitution explicitly giving citizens the freedom of speech, assembly, association, procession, and demonstration, China has convinced citizens that their responsibilities are to expose fellow citizens who do not follow enforcement measures, even if it means invading their privacy. Interest groups, social movements, and individual citizens who practice free speech and more, to protect themselves against the regime's rule, were ultimately silenced and punished. Women like Mao Hengfeng, a victim of forced abortion, attempted to receive justice and speak out against the policy, but was instead sentenced to 18 months in a labor camp, where she was later tortured, denied vitally needed medicine, and faced with life-threatening danger even after her sentence was completed. The government strategically instilled fear in the citizens, utilizing coercive enforcement techniques, leading to an immense decrease in civil society and revocation of the citizens' ability to take part in demonstrations or assemble against China's family planning policy. This strengthened the power the Chinese Communist Party held over the country, as they suppressed the citizens' freedom of expression and restricted their right to assemble. Over the course of the devastating one-child policy, citizens have lost their basic human rights and ability to partake in their responsibilities. Harsh policy implementation, violations of reproductive rights, dismissing of children's rights, and restriction of citizen responsibilities all sprouted from the government's actions to fulfill their responsibility of providing resources and economic stability to their citizens. Although the policy ended in 2015, we must ask ourselves, how does it still impact the world today? Mei Fong, a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author of the 2016 top 10 nonfiction book, One Child, The Story of China's Most Radical Experiment, says, China has a population that's basically too old and too male, and down the line maybe too few. The irony lies within the fact that the policy aimed to decrease the population, but conversely, the population is now in need of a larger youth to ensure that the future will have a balanced elderly to young ratio. Furthermore, the policy led to a favoring of male offspring, skewing the male to female ratio in China and leading to a surplus of 30 million men. Those 30 million men will have difficulty getting married and will therefore not have offspring, contributing to an increase in sex trafficking. Citizens of neighboring countries such as Myanmar and Vietnam have been victims of China's sex trafficking, also known as bride trafficking. It has gained publicity internationally and has complicated China's relationships with Myanmar and Vietnam, who acknowledge that China is not acting to prevent human trafficking. On the flip side, since implementing free market reforms and opening up to investment and foreign trade in 1979 under Deng Xiaoping, China has been among the world's fastest growing economies and a top merchandise trading partner to countries such as the United States. Despite this, China's success as an economic juggernaut will inevitably be challenged if they do not fix their aging population. While China experienced an economic boom, consistent declines in birth rates, fertility rates, population natural growth rates, and a consistent increase in death rates have hurt China more than helped. When looking at current trends, even with the loosening of regulations and the ability for citizens to have up to 3 children, the generations of one-child children seem to want to stay in one-child families. The United Nations predict that China's current population of 1.42 billion will decrease to 639 million by 2100. China's ability to open up the economy while maintaining control over civil society is quite impressive yet concerning, and it serves as a lesson on the importance of protecting the rights and responsibilities of citizens to ensure a long-term prosperous and strong nation.